The morning sky over New Geneva burned with unnatural colors as the Zelkari dreadnought descended through Earth's atmosphere. Captain Sarah Chen watched from the observation deck of the orbital defense station, her knuckles white against the metal railing. The alien vessel was massive, easily 3 kilometers long, its crystalline hull reflecting the sunlight in prismatic patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from the communications array. His voice carried an edge of uncertainty that made Sarah's stomach tighten. "Put it through," she ordered, not taking her eyes off the descending ship. The voice that filled the command center was melodic yet cold, speaking perfect English with an accent that seemed to shift between syllables. "Humans of Earth, I am Warsinger Veltar of the Zelkari hegemony. Your species has been deemed problematic. Your expansion into what you call the Kepler sector has disrupted carefully maintained trade routes. Your refusal to submit to proper authority has been noted." Sarah finally turned from the window, her jaw set. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of Earth Defense Command. You are in violation of the Sol System Protection Treaty. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." A sound that might have been laughter echoed through the speakers. "Consequences? From a species that has barely learned to leave its birth world? We have studied your kind for decades, little captain. We know your weaknesses, your excessive attachment to your young, your inability to make rational decisions when emotion clouds your judgment." The transmission cut to static, and Sarah felt ice form in her veins. She grabbed the nearest communication console. "All stations, this is command. Initiate Protocol 7. All civilian vessels are to move to safe distance immediately." But it was already too late. The first beam of coherent energy struck the surface of Earth like a finger of God, carving a line of destruction across the Australian continent. The second struck the Atlantic, sending massive tsunamis racing toward both coasts. But it was the third beam that would change everything. It struck the Sunshine Children's Home outside Geneva, a facility that housed over 300 orphaned children from across the European Federation. The building simply ceased, where it had stood for 40 years, providing hope and shelter to the forgotten children of humanity. There was now only a crater of fused glass and twisted metal. Sarah watched the feeds from the surface cameras, her face stone. Around her, the command crew stood in stunned silence. 300 children, gone in an instant. Not soldiers, not threats, just children who had already lost everything once before. "Captain," Rodriguez whispered, his voice breaking. "My daughter. She was visiting there today. The educational tour." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling something fundamental shift inside her chest. When she opened them again, they were filled with a cold fire that would have made the Zelkari pause, had they understood what they were looking at. "Rodriguez, I need you to send a message to all ships, all stations, all colonies. Emergency Priority 1. Her voice was steady, controlled, but those who knew her could hear the volcano building beneath. "Ma'am, tell them what happened here today. Tell them exactly what the Zelkari did, and then tell them this. Humanity remembers its children." The Warsinger Veltar stood on the bridge of his vessel, satisfied with the demonstration. Humans were emotional creatures, prone to despair when their young were threatened. The psychological profile suggested they would surrender rather than risk further such attacks. It was an efficient method, really. Quick, clean, and infinitely more cost-effective than a prolonged orbital bombardment. "Warsinger," his tactical officer reported, "we are detecting increased communications traffic from the human defense network. Multiple ships are changing course toward our position." Veltar gestured dismissively with one of his forearms. "Let them come. A few primitive warships pose no threat to the judgment of stars. What is our current shield status?"
"Full power, Warsinger."
"Their weapons cannot penetrate our defenses. Excellent. We shall destroy their fleet. Then proceed with the subjugation protocol. The surviving humans will make adequate labor stock once properly motivated." What Veltar didn't understand, what his species' careful psychological profiles had failed to grasp, was the difference between human fear and human rage. Fear made humans cautious, made them retreat, made them negotiate. But rage made them dangerous in ways that no alien species had ever truly comprehended. In the depths of the asteroid belt, mining crews abandoned their operations and began retrofitting their massive industrial ships with military hardware. On Mars, the terraforming crews stopped their work and started building something else entirely. Throughout the outer colonies, human vessels that had never been designed for war began transforming themselves into instruments of vengeance. But it was Earth itself that surprised everyone. Deep beneath the surface of the planet, in facilities that officially didn't exist, humanity had been preparing for this day, not specifically for the Zelkari, but for any species that might threaten their home. Projects that had been theoretical, weapons that had been deemed too dangerous, defenses that had been considered overkill suddenly found their funding approved and their construction timelines accelerated. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the primary control room of Installation Prometheus, watching as decades of careful preparation finally paid off. Around him, scientists and military personnel worked with quiet efficiency, their faces grim with purpose. Director Webb, his assistant called, "We're receiving authorization codes from command. All projects are green-lit for immediate deployment." Webb nodded slowly, thinking of his grandson who had been scheduled to visit the orphanage that morning. The boy had been sick with flu, a minor illness that had probably saved his life. Very well. Activate the Damocles array, and send word to our friends in the belt. Tell them it's time to show the galaxy what humanity is really capable of. Above them, the Zelkari dreadnought continued its lazy orbit, confident in its superiority. Warsinger Veltar was already composing his report to the Hegemony Council, describing the successful pacification of yet another primitive species. He had no idea that he had just awakened something that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization itself. The Zelkari had made many mistakes in their long history of conquest, but none would prove as costly as the decision to target humanity's children. The war was about to begin, and for the first time in their existence, the Zelkari were about to learn what it meant to face an enemy that fought not for territory or resources, but for the memory of 300 innocent souls. The Zelkari warsinger Veltar had ruled over 17 conquered worlds, each subdued through careful application of psychological warfare and overwhelming force. His methods were precise, clinical, and had never failed. Strike at what the species valued most, demonstrate absolute power, and watch as resistance crumbled into submission. That was before he encountered humanity. 6 hours after the destruction of the Sunshine Children's Home, Veltar received his first indication that something was wrong. His communications officer, Third Caste Zekrin, approached the command dais with obvious nervousness. "Warsinger, we are detecting anomalous energy signatures throughout this system. The humans appear to be activating something." Veltar turned his primary attention to the tactical display. What he saw made him pause. Across the solar system, previously hidden installations were coming online, not the crude orbital platforms they had already cataloged, but something else entirely. Deep space sensors revealed massive structures emerging from what had appeared to be ordinary asteroids. "What am I looking at, Zekrin?" "Unknown, Warsinger. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases, and there's something else." The communications officer hesitated. "We're receiving transmissions from across their network. The content is concerning, elaborate. They're not negotiating, Warsinger. They're not requesting terms or offering surrender. They're sharing information about our ship, technical specifications, weak points, tactical assessments, and they're sharing something else." Veltar felt a chill run through his scaled hide. "Show me." The main viewer flickered to life, displaying intercepted human communications. What Veltar saw defied his understanding of how conquered species were supposed to behave. Instead of panic and despair, he witnessed something he had never encountered before. Organized, methodical, implacable rage. A grizzled human admiral spoke from the bridge of a massive ship approaching from the outer system. "All vessels, this is Admiral Yamamoto aboard the UENS Retribution. I have confirmed visual on the alien vessel responsible for the Geneva incident. They killed our children. They thought it would break us." The man's eyes were like ice. They were wrong. Another transmission showed mining crews welding military-grade weapons onto industrial haulers. "This is Foreman Jackson from Ceres Station. We've got 47 modified cargo vessels ready for combat operations. Our payload capacity might not be military standard, but I guarantee these bastards won't like what we're carrying." A young woman in a Mars Colonial Authority uniform appeared on screen, standing before a massive construction that defied easy description. "Dr. Reyes here from the Olympus facility. Project Warhammer is online and ready for deployment, for the children of Geneva." Veltar watched transmission after transmission, each showing humans abandoning their civilian roles and transforming into something else. Scientists became weapons designers, miners became warriors, teachers became tacticians, and all of them shared the same cold determination. Warsinger, his tactical officer, reported with growing concern, "Human vessels are converging on our position from multiple vectors. Their approach patterns are unusual." Veltar studied the tactical display more carefully. The approaching human ships weren't following standard military formations. Instead, they moved in patterns that seemed almost artistic. It took him several moments to realize what he was seeing. "They're forming a sphere around us," he said quietly. "Yes, Warsinger, complete three-dimensional encirclement. But that's not the concerning part." "What do you mean?" "Warsinger, they're not trying to hide their approach. In fact, they're broadcasting their positions openly. It's as if they want us to see them coming." For the first time since beginning his conquest career, Veltar felt uncertainty creep into his thoughts. Standard doctrine suggested that cornered prey would either fight desperately or attempt to negotiate. These humans were doing neither. They were approaching with the slow, inexorable confidence of predators who knew their prey was already trapped. "Status on our weapon systems: all batteries charged and ready, Warsinger. Our shields remain at maximum strength. And our escape routes." The tactical officer paused. "Warsinger, the human formation is designed to prevent withdrawal. They have positioned vessels at every potential jump point. Even if we attempted to flee, they could intercept us before our drives could fully charge." Veltar's confidence began to erode. No conquered species had ever dared to trap a Zelkari dreadnought. The very concept was unthinkable. "How many ships are we facing?" "Approximately 300 vessels, Warsinger. But most appeared to be converted civilian craft. Hardly a threat to the judgment of stars." "Then why do I feel like we're the ones being hunted?" His question was answered when the first human transmission reached his ship directly. The signal was strong, unencrypted, and clearly meant for him personally. "Zelkari vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chen of Earth Defense Command. I want you to understand something very clearly. You made a mistake today. A terrible, unforgivable mistake." Veltar activated his communications array. "Human captain, you are addressing Warsinger Veltar of the Zelkari hegemony. Your species would be wise to surrender immediately. The demonstration you witnessed was merely a sample of our capabilities." "No," came the reply, and the coldness in the human's voice made Veltar's primary heart skip a beat. "You misunderstand. That wasn't a demonstration of your power. That was the moment you signed your death warrant. Impossible. Your primitive weapons cannot penetrate our defenses." "Warsinger Veltar," Captain Chen continued, and now her voice carried a note of something that might have been pity. "In all your studies of humanity, did you ever learn about our concept of escalation?" Before Veltar could respond, his sensors detected new energy signatures. Throughout the human fleet, weapons were powering up. But these weren't the crude projectile weapons or basic energy cannons his intelligence reports had described. These were something else entirely. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the control room of Installation Prometheus, his fingers hovering over the activation controls. Around him, technicians made final adjustments to systems that had been decades in the making. "Director," his chief scientist reported, "the Damocles array is fully charged. All 7 orbital platforms are locked onto the target." Webb thought again of the children who had died that morning. 300 innocent lives, snuffed out by creatures who saw them as nothing more than leverage in a political equation. Authorization code confirmed. Fire when ready. High above Earth's atmosphere, 7 hidden stations that had masqueraded as communication satellites for over 20 years finally revealed their true purpose. Massive energy accumulators that had been charging from the sun itself for decades suddenly discharged their stored power in perfectly synchronized beams. Warsinger Veltar watched in disbelief as 7 columns of coherent solar energy struck his ship's shield simultaneously. The judgment of stars, which had weathered the weapons of 17 different species, shuddered under the assault. "Shield status," he commanded. "Shields holding at 60%, Warsinger, but the energy output is beyond our calculations." "How did they—" The tactical officer's words were cut off as the human fleet opened fire. But instead of the primitive weapons Veltar expected, he found himself facing technology that shouldn't have existed. Magnetic acceleration cannons fired projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Particle beams carved through space with surgical precision. And stranger weapons, devices that seemed to bend space itself. creating gravitational anomalies that stressed his ship's hull in impossible ways. Warsinger, his communications officer, called out over the alarms now sounding throughout the ship. "I'm receiving a message from the human admiral." On screen, Admiral Yamamoto appeared, standing calmly on his bridge while the space around him lit up with weapons fire. "Warsinger Veltar, you wanted to know about human escalation. Let me explain. When you threaten our military, we respond with military force. When you threaten our colonies, we respond with fleet action. But when you murder our children..." The Admiral's expression grew arctic. "We respond with everything we have." The Judgment of Stars, pride of the Zelkari hegemony, had never retreated from battle. In 800 years of service, it had brought 43 species to their knees, its crystalline hull bearing the scars of countless victories. Warsinger Veltar had been certain that humanity would be just another entry in his conquest log. That certainty died as his ship's shields collapsed under the sustained bombardment from the human fleet. "Emergency power to defensive systems," Veltar commanded, his forearms working frantically at his control stations. "Return fire on all targets." The Zelkari weapons systems, feared throughout the galaxy for their precision and power, unleashed their fury upon the approaching human vessels. Beams of concentrated plasma lanced out, striking the converted mining ships and improvised warships with devastating effect. And to Veltar's horror, the humans didn't retreat. The UN's Retribution, Admiral Yamamoto's flagship, took a direct hit that vaporized its entire port section. Any sane species would have withdrawn. Instead, the massive ship continued its approach, weapons blazing, while emergency teams sealed the breach and continued fighting. Warsinger, his tactical officer, reported with growing panic. "The humans are not responding to casualties as predicted. We've destroyed 17 of their vessels, but the remainder continue to advance." Veltar watched the tactical display with mounting dread. The human ships were closing the distance despite taking terrible losses. More disturbing was their apparent willingness to sacrifice themselves for minimal tactical gain. A converted cargo hauler rammed itself into his ship's secondary weapon array, its crew undoubtedly knowing they would die in the collision. "This is madness," he whispered. "No species fights like this." His communications officer looked up from his station with wide, frightened eyes. "Warsinger, I'm intercepting human communications. They're sharing stories." "What do you mean?" "Stories about the children who died today. Names, faces, dreams they'll never fulfill. A girl named Sarah who wanted to be a doctor. A boy named Miguel who collected ancient books. They're not just fighting for territory or resources, Warsinger. They're fighting for memory." Veltar felt something he had never experienced before, the cold touch of genuine fear. He had conquered species that fought for survival, for freedom, for honor. But this was different. These humans were fighting for something more primal, more dangerous than any military objective. They were fighting for love. On the bridge of the mining vessel Prometheus's Hammer, Captain Elena Vasquez watched her converted cargo ship closing on the alien dreadnought. Her crew of 37 miners and engineers had volunteered for this mission, knowing it was likely suicide. But when the call had gone out after Geneva, there hadn't been a single hesitation. "Captain," her improvised weapons officer called out, "we're in range for payload delivery." Elena looked at the massive Zelkari ship ahead of them, its alien beauty somehow obscene in the light of what it had done. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy it. We need to breach their hull and deliver our package." "Understood, Captain. Initiating final approach." The Prometheus's Hammer had been a deep space mining vessel, designed to crack asteroids and extract valuable minerals. Its mining charges had been replaced with something far more dangerous, a quantum destabilizer that would tear holes in space-time itself. It was untested, experimental, and probably suicidal to use at close range. Elena didn't care. "All crew, this is your captain," she announced over the ship's communications. "We're going in. For Geneva. For the children." The response that came back from her crew was unanimous and heartfelt. "For the children." Warsinger Veltar watched in disbelief as the human mining ship continued its approach, despite taking devastating hits from his point defense systems. The vessel was literally coming apart under the assault, venting atmosphere and debris, but it refused to stop. "What are they trying to accomplish?" he demanded. "That ship poses no significant threat to our hull integrity." His answer came when the mining ship suddenly accelerated, driving itself directly into his dreadnought's primary sensor array. The impact was negligible by military standards, but something else happened in that moment that changed the nature of the battle forever. The mining ship's cargo bay opened, releasing a device that Veltar's sensors couldn't identify. It attached itself to his ship's hull and began to glow with an eerie blue light. Warsinger, his chief engineer, screamed over the communications system. Something's happening to the hull. Sections 7 through 12 are... They're not there anymore. Veltar stared at his tactical display in confusion. What do you mean, not there? Warsinger, the humans have deployed some kind of spatial weapon. It's creating gaps in our hull that bypass our shields entirely. We're losing atmosphere on 17 decks. Before Veltar could respond, more human ships began their final approaches. Each one carried similar devices, and each one was crewed by beings who seemed completely unconcerned with their own survival. On Earth, Dr. Marcus Webb watched the battle unfold from his command center. The quantum destabilizers were working better than his most optimistic projections. Each device created a temporary hole in spacetime, allowing human boarding teams to bypass the alien shields entirely. Director, his communications officer reported, we're receiving confirmation from boarding team Alpha. They've successfully penetrated the alien vessel. Webb nodded grimly. The boarding teams were composed of volunteers from Earth's special forces, each one carrying enough explosives to cripple a city block. Their mission was simple: disable the alien ship from within. But what Webb hadn't told them was that the quantum destabilizers had a secondary effect. Once activated, they would continue to grow, eventually consuming anything within a 10-kilometer radius. The boarding teams were heroes walking into certain death, and they knew it. Major Jennifer Park led boarding team Alpha through the twisted corridors of the Zelkari ship. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly due to the spatial distortions, making movement difficult, but her team pressed forward with grim determination. Remember, she told her soldiers through their tactical network, these things killed children. 300 innocent kids who never had a chance to fight back. The team moved through the alien vessel like ghosts, their advanced stealth systems hiding them from Zelkari sensors. They planted their charges with methodical precision, targeting critical systems and support structures. As they worked, Major Park couldn't help but think about her nephew Tommy, who had been scheduled to visit the orphanage that morning. He'd been sick with a fever, a minor illness that had saved his life. She wondered if he would understand someday why Aunt Jenny had chosen to die in the cold depths of space. Warsinger Veltar felt his ship dying around him. Human boarding teams had somehow penetrated his vessel's defenses and were systematically destroying critical systems. His proud dreadnought, which had once made entire star systems surrender without firing a shot, was being torn apart by primitive creatures who shouldn't have been able to even scratch its hull. Warsinger, his communications officer, called out desperately, I'm receiving a transmission from Earth. They're offering terms. Terms? Veltar almost laughed. They're offering us terms while they're destroying our ship? Warsinger, you should hear this. The transmission came through clear and strong, carrying the voice of Captain Sarah Chen. Warsinger Veltar, this is your final warning. Surrender now, and we will allow your crew to evacuate. Refuse, and we will continue this engagement until your ship is nothing but debris. Veltar activated his communications array with shaking hands. Human Captain, you don't understand what you're doing. The Zelkari hegemony controls 300 star systems. If you destroy this ship, they will send a fleet that will turn your world to ash. The response came back without hesitation, and the cold certainty in the human's voice made Veltar's blood freeze. Warsinger, you still don't understand. We're not just fighting for our world anymore. We're fighting for the principle that species who murder children don't get to exist in this galaxy. Your hegemony can send every ship they have. We'll be waiting. The destruction of the Judgment of Stars sent shockwaves throughout the Zelkari hegemony that had nothing to do with the quantum destabilizers that finally consumed the massive dreadnought. For the first time in their 800-year history of conquest, a Zelkari war vessel had been completely destroyed by what they considered a primitive species. High Counselor Zarthek received the news in his crystalline palace on the hegemony capital world of Velkaris. The ancient Zelkari had ruled for over 3 centuries, having personally overseen the subjugation of dozens of species. The report he now read challenged everything he understood about galactic power structures. "You're telling me," he said slowly to the messenger before him, "that the humans not only destroyed Warsinger Veltar's vessel, but did so using previously unknown weapons technology?" Fleet Commander Zendok, one of the few survivors rescued from the escape pods, nodded nervously. "High Counselor, their capabilities far exceeded our intelligence estimates. They deployed spatial distortion weapons, energy cannons powered by stellar collection arrays, and boarding teams that fought with a ferocity I have never witnessed. And the psychological warfare? The destruction of their breeding facility should have broken their will to resist." Zendok's scales shifted to a pale blue, indicating deep distress. "High Counselor, I believe our attack had the opposite effect. The humans didn't surrender or negotiate. They became something else. Something dangerous." Zarthek turned to gaze out at the sprawling city below his palace, where millions of Zelkari lived in the comfort provided by 3 centuries of successful conquests. The wealth of 43 enslaved species had built this paradise, and the threat of Zelkari military might kept the peace. "Summon Fleet Admiral Kexvar," he commanded. "It appears we need to teach these humans the true meaning of overwhelming force." 3 days later, the largest battle fleet in Zelkari history assembled in the void between star systems. 700 warships, from massive dreadnoughts to swift attack cruisers, gathered under the command of Fleet Admiral Kexvar, the most decorated military commander in hegemony history. Kexvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, reviewing the tactical data from the Sol system. The human homeworld appeared to be mobilizing every available vessel, but their total fleet strength was barely 200 ships, most of them converted civilian craft. "Admiral," his intelligence officer reported, "we're detecting unusual energy signatures throughout the human system. It appears they're activating more hidden installations." "Expected," Kexvar replied calmly. "The humans revealed some of their secret weapons during the previous engagement. We've accounted for their capabilities in our battle plans. What the Admiral didn't know was that humanity had spent the last 72 hours doing something unprecedented in galactic history. Every human colony, every research station, every deep space installation had received the same message. Geneva has been avenged, but the war is just beginning. They're coming with everything they have. Are you ready to show them what humanity is really capable of?" The response had been immediate and overwhelming. Technologies that had been theoretical became practical. Weapons that had been deemed too dangerous were suddenly deemed necessary. Projects that would have taken decades were completed in days by crews working around the clock, with the cold fury that only comes from absolute moral certainty. Dr. Elena Vasquez, sister to the mining captain who had died ramming the Zelkari dreadnought, stood in the control room of the Titan research station in orbit around Saturn, before her stretched displays showing the progress of humanity's most ambitious project, the complete weaponization of the solar system itself. "Director," her chief engineer reported, "the solar collectors are at maximum efficiency. We're storing energy at a rate of 10 exajoules per second. Asteroid cannon placements. All 1,700 installations are online and loaded. We've got enough kinetic projectiles to bombard a dozen worlds. And the special projects?" The engineer's expression grew grim. "Project Prometheus is ready for deployment. As is Project Pandora. Ma'am, are you certain about this? If we deploy these weapons, there's no going back. The galaxy will never be the same." Elena thought about her sister who had died to deliver a single quantum destabilizer to the enemy ship. They killed children, Marcus. 300 innocent children. The galaxy has already changed. Admiral Yamamoto coordinated the defense from his new flagship, the UEN's Vengeance, built in the 48 hours since the destruction of the Retribution. Around him, the combined human fleet had grown to nearly 1,000 vessels as ships arrived from every human settlement in known space. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "we're detecting the Zelkari fleet at the edge of sensor range. Estimated 700 ships, including multiple dreadnought-class vessels." Yamamoto studied the tactical display with calm precision. The Zelkari force was massive, easily the largest invasion fleet in recorded galactic history. Under normal circumstances, it would be sufficient to conquer an entire star system. These were not normal circumstances. "Signal all ships," Yamamoto commanded. "Formation Delta 7. Prepare for Operation Righteous Fury." "Sir," His communications officer called out. "We're receiving a transmission from the Zelkari fleet. They're demanding our surrender." On screen, Fleet Admiral Kexvar appeared, his forearms spread in what Yamamoto recognized as a gesture of dominance among the Zelkari. "Humans of Sol, I am Fleet Admiral Kexvar of the Zelkari hegemony. You have destroyed a hegemony vessel and killed hegemony citizens. This transgression cannot be overlooked." Yamamoto stepped forward, his expression carved from stone. "Admiral Kexvar, this is Admiral Yamamoto of the United Earth Navy. You are addressing the representatives of a species you attempted to terrorize by murdering our children. The destruction of your breeding facility was a calculated action designed to minimize overall casualties. Your species' refusal to surrender has necessitated this larger response." "Admiral," Yamamoto replied, and his voice carried a coldness that made even his own crew shiver. "You seem to be operating under a fundamental misunderstanding. We didn't refuse to surrender. We chose war." Kexvar's scales shifted to an aggressive red pattern. "Then you have chosen extinction. This fleet carries enough firepower to sterilize your entire system. Surrender now, and your species will be permitted to exist as a client state of the hegemony." Yamamoto looked directly into the camera, and when he spoke, his words were heard by every human in the solar system. "Admiral Kexvar, you made one critical error in your calculations. You assumed that threatening our children would make us weak. Instead, it made us something that your species has never encountered before." "And what is that, human?" "Absolutely implacable." The transmission ended, and Yamamoto turned to his weapons officer. "Signal the Titan station. Authorize Project Prometheus." Dr. Elena Vasquez received the authorization code and entered it into her command console. Around Saturn, 17 massive installations that had been disguised as research stations suddenly revealed their true nature. Each one was essentially a stellar-scale particle accelerator, designed to launch projectiles at nearly the speed of light. But these weren't ordinary projectiles. Each installation launched a stream of antimatter-contained asteroids, their trajectories calculated to arrive at the Zelkari fleet position simultaneously from multiple vectors. Fleet Admiral Kexvar was reviewing his battle plans when his tactical officer suddenly screamed a warning that chilled the blood of every crew member on the bridge. "Admiral, incoming projectiles from the inner system. Velocity is 97% light speed. Time to impact 14 seconds. Kexvar stared at his tactical display in disbelief. 17 streams of projectiles were converging on his fleet position, moving at speeds that made evasion impossible, and carried kinetic energy that would make nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. "All ships," he broadcast frantically. "Emergency scatter. Maximum emergency power to shields." But 13 seconds wasn't enough time to save 700 ships from the fury of a species that had just learned to weaponize stellar mechanics. The destruction of the Zelkari invasion fleet created a light show visible from 3 star systems away. 700 warships, the pride of an empire that had dominated the galaxy for centuries, were reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma in less than 30 seconds. Fleet Admiral Kexvar watched from the bridge of his crippled flagship as his entire command disintegrated around him. The Eternal Dominion had survived only because it had been positioned at the edge of the formation, but even so, the ship was venting atmosphere from 17 hull breaches and had lost primary power. "Report," he croaked to his surviving bridge. "Crew, Admiral," his tactical officer replied, with a voice filled with shock. "Preliminary scans indicate total fleet destruction. We're detecting fewer than 50 escape pods across the entire battle zone." Kexvar closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of the disaster. In 30 seconds, humanity had accomplished what no species in galactic history had ever managed: the complete annihilation of a Zelkari battle fleet. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." Admiral Yamamoto appeared on the main viewer, standing calmly on his bridge as if he hadn't just witnessed the obliteration of 700 warships. "Admiral Kexvar, this is Admiral Yamamoto. Do you require assistance with your evacuation procedures?" The casual tone of the question struck Kexvar like a physical blow. The human was offering aid to the survivors of a fleet that had come to destroy his homeworld. You would help us?" "Admiral, despite what your species seems to believe about humanity, we don't take pleasure in unnecessary death. Your fleet came here with hostile intent and we responded accordingly, but your surviving crew members are no longer a threat. Kexvar struggled to understand the alien logic. Why? We came to subjugate your species. We destroyed your children. Yamamoto's expression hardened slightly. Yes, you did. And for that crime, your invasion fleet has been destroyed and your war singers eliminated. But the beings floating in those escape pods didn't make the decision to target civilians. They were following orders. This is not how war is conducted, Kexvar whispered. No, Yamamoto agreed. This is how justice is conducted. There's a difference. The rescue operation that followed became the subject of study for xenopsychologists throughout the galaxy. Human ships moved through the debris field, collecting Zelkari survivors with methodical efficiency. The aliens were provided medical care, shelter, and even comfort items from their own culture that humans had researched and synthesized. Commander Lisa Park, sister to the Special Forces Major who had died aboard the Zelkari dreadnought, led one of the rescue teams. As she helped pull a young Zelkari engineer from a damaged escape pod, the alien looked at her with confusion and fear. Why? The engineer asked in halting standard. Why help enemies? Lisa thought about her sister Jennifer, who had died to protect other children from suffering the same fate as the Geneva orphans. Because that's what my sister would have done. She died to protect innocence. That includes innocent Zelkari. The alien stared at her for a long moment, then began to weep in the manner of his species, his scales shifting through a spectrum of colors that indicated profound emotional distress. While the rescue operations continued, humanity was already planning its next move. The destruction of 2 Zelkari fleets would not go unnoticed by the hegemony. Retaliation was inevitable, and this time it would likely involve the full might of their 300-system empire. Dr. Marcus Webb stood in a secure conference room aboard the UENS Vengeance, surrounded by the military and scientific leaders of humanity. Before them lay plans that would have been considered impossible just a week earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, Webb began, the Zelkari have shown us what they consider acceptable behavior in warfare. The targeting of civilian populations, specifically children, appears to be standard doctrine for them. Admiral Yamamoto nodded grimly. Intelligence suggests that psychological warfare through child targeting is how they've conquered most of their empire. It's efficient, cost-effective, and until now, universally successful. Which brings us to our current situation, Dr. Elena Vasquez continued, calling up a holographic display of local stellar cartography. The Zelkari hegemony controls 300 star systems. They have approximately 40,000 warships at their disposal, and a total population exceeding 1 trillion beings. The room fell silent as the magnitude of the challenge became clear. Humanity, despite their recent victories, had fewer than 2,000 ships and controlled only 12 star systems. However, Webb continued with a slight smile, we have certain advantages that the Zelkari do not, such as? Asked Captain Chen, who had been promoted to admiral following her performance during the initial engagement. They think like conquerors, Webb explained. Their entire military doctrine is based on intimidation and overwhelming force applied against civilian targets. They've never faced an enemy that considers such tactics to be unforgivable war crimes. Dr. Vasquez activated another display, showing technical schematics that made several of the military officers pale. More importantly, they've never faced an enemy with our particular approach to engineering ethics. Admiral Yamamoto studied the plans with the expression of a man looking into an abyss. Elena, are you certain about these projects? Some of these weapons could be considered excessive. David, Dr. Vasquez replied, using the Admiral's first name in the informal manner that had developed among humanity's leaders since Geneva. They murdered 300 children to make a point. I don't think excessive is a concern anymore. The plans before them represented the complete militarization of human space. Project Prometheus had been just the beginning. Project Pandora would turn entire asteroids into kinetic bombardment platforms. Project Nemesis would create mobile black holes for area denial. And Project Apocalypse would weaponize stars themselves. The timeline? Admiral Yamamoto asked. 3 months for full deployment, Webb replied. We've got every human settlement working around the clock. Miners, engineers, scientists, even children are contributing to the effort. And the Zelkari response? According to our prisoner interrogations, the Hegemony Council is convening an emergency session. They're likely to declare humanity a threat to galactic stability and authorize total extermination protocols. Admiral Chen leaned forward in her chair. How long before they can mount another assault? Conservative estimates suggest 6 months for a full-scale invasion force. They'll likely bring the entire hegemony fleet this time. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. In 6 months, humanity would face the combined military might of a galactic empire that had never known defeat. There is one other option, Dr. Webb said quietly. Which is? We don't wait for them to come to us. The plan that Webb outlined was audacious beyond measure. Rather than waiting for the Zelkari to mount another invasion, humanity would take the war to them, not with conventional military tactics but with something unprecedented in galactic history. A preemptive strike designed not to conquer territory, but to eliminate the capacity for child-targeting warfare forever. You're talking about attacking 300 star systems simultaneously, Admiral Yamamoto said slowly. Not attacking, Webb corrected. Liberating. Every species the Zelkari have conquered will be offered the same choice. Join humanity's coalition against child killers, or remain neutral. We won't force anyone to fight, and the Zelkari themselves? Webb's expression grew cold. Any Zelkari military vessel or installation that has been involved in targeting civilian populations will be destroyed. Any Zelkari leader who has authorized such attacks will be arrested and tried for war crimes. The Zelkari species itself will be offered the same choice as everyone else. Abandon their current government and military doctrine, or face the consequences. Admiral Chen looked around the room at her colleagues. Are we really considering declaring war on an entire galactic empire? Admiral, Dr. Vasquez replied quietly, they declared war on our children. Everything else is just details. As the meeting concluded and the leaders of humanity dispersed to begin the most ambitious military campaign in galactic history, none of them noticed the small observation drone that had been watching from the shadows. The device belonged to the hegemony's intelligence service, and it had been recording everything. High Counselor Zarthek received the intelligence report on Velkaris 3 days later. As he read the transcript of the human leadership meeting, his ancient features shifted through expressions of disbelief, rage, and finally, something approaching fear. The humans weren't planning to defend their territory. They were planning to destroy the hegemony entirely. And based on what they had already accomplished, they might actually succeed. For the first time in his 3-century rule, Zarthek began to consider the possibility that the Zelkari hegemony might not survive the next year. The Galactic Council had not convened an emergency session in over 200 years. The last time had been during the Hive Wars, when the insectoid Kretak had threatened to consume 3 entire sectors before being stopped by a coalition of 12 species. Now representatives from 47 different civilizations gathered in the massive station orbiting the neutral world of Nexus Prime, all drawn by reports that defied belief. Ambassador Tikora of the Sivari Confederation reviewed the intelligence reports for the 3rd time, her crystalline features reflecting the holographic displays floating before her. Are we certain these readings are accurate? Verified by 17 independent sources, replied Executor Voss of the Terran Republic. The human representative was calm, almost serene as he addressed the assembled delegates. The Zelkari invasion fleet was destroyed in its entirety by kinetic bombardment from the Sol system. No survivors among the command staff. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. The Zelkari hegemony had been a dominant force in galactic politics for 8 centuries. The idea that they could suffer such a catastrophic defeat was almost inconceivable. Executor Voss, spoke Elder Zephyron of the ancient ethereal collective, his telepathic voice echoing in the minds of all present. Your species has been classified as pre-spaceflight as recently as 200 of your years ago. How is such a military capability possible? Voss turned to face the assembled delegates, and several of them noticed something in his expression that made them uncomfortable. There was a coldness there, a hardness that hadn't existed in human representatives during previous diplomatic contacts. Elder Zephyron, my species has made certain accelerated developments in military technology. These advances were necessitated by Zelkari war crimes committed against civilian populations on Earth. War crimes? Ambassador Tikora's voice carried a note of confusion. The Zelkari military doctrine, while aggressive, has not been classified as criminal under galactic law. The deliberate targeting of children for psychological warfare is a war crime under human law, Voss replied, and now his voice carried an edge that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. 300 innocent children were murdered to send a message to our government. This action was deemed unacceptable. Executor Grimm of the Vorthan Empire, a species known for their own military prowess, leaned forward in his seat. Executor Voss, while the loss of civilian life is regrettable, it is not unprecedented in galactic warfare. The Zelkari have used similar tactics against dozens of species over the centuries. The silence that followed was profound. Every delegate in the chamber suddenly understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented. A species that considered child targeting to be absolutely unforgivable, rather than merely distasteful. Executor Grimm, Voss said quietly, are you telling me that your species has accepted Zelkari attacks on your children as normal warfare? The Vorthan Empire negotiated terms that protected our civilian populations early in our contact with the hegemony. We found it pragmatic to avoid such conflicts. Voss stood slowly, and when he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute moral certainty. Let me be clear to all delegates present. Humanity will not negotiate with child killers. We will not find accommodation with child killers. We will not coexist with child killers. Any individual, organization, or government that deliberately targets children for any reason will be considered an enemy of the human species. Elder Zephron's telepathic voice carried a note of concern. Executor Voss, you speak as if your species intends to enforce this principle beyond your own borders. Elder Zephron, that is exactly what we intend. The chamber erupted in shocked conversation as the implications became clear. Ambassador Takora called for order, then addressed the human representative directly. Executor Voss, are you informing this council that humanity intends to wage war against any species that employs tactics you consider unacceptable? No, Ambassador Takora. I am informing this council that humanity intends to wage war against any species that targets children. The distinction is important, but that would mean that any government or military organization that has authorized attacks on civilian children is now considered a legitimate target for human military action. Yes, the silence that followed was broken by Executor Grimm. Executor Voss, what you're describing is impossible. No single species can enforce their moral code across the galaxy. Voss smiled, and the expression was utterly without warmth. Executor Grimm, 3 days ago the Zelkari would have agreed with you. They considered humanity to be a minor, primitive species incapable of threatening their empire. And now they have no invasion fleet, no experienced war singers, and intelligence reports suggesting that humanity has developed weapons capable of sterilizing star systems. Ambassador Takora felt a chill run through her crystalline structure. Executor Voss, surely you're not suggesting? I am stating fact, Ambassador. Humanity now possesses the technological capability to destroy any star system that harbors child killers. We also possess the moral certainty to use that capability. The emergency session continued for 18 hours as delegates struggled to comprehend the paradigm shift that humanity represented. Never before had a species emerged on the galactic stage with both the capability and the absolute moral conviction to enforce their ethical standards across interstellar distances. Meanwhile, in the Sol system, the largest construction project in human history neared completion. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the observation deck of the command station orbiting Jupiter, watching as the final components of Project Apocalypse were installed. Director, her chief engineer reported, the stellar manipulation array is fully operational. We can now initiate controlled solar flares, create directed coronal mass ejections, and in extreme cases, trigger premature stellar collapse, Elena nodded, thinking about the children of Geneva, who would never see another sunrise. Range and accuracy? Effective range of 50 light-years with pinpoint accuracy. We can target individual planets while leaving the rest of a star system intact. And the other projects? Project Nemesis has produced 17 mobile singularities, each capable of area denial across an entire star system. Project Pandora has converted 40,000 asteroids into kinetic bombardment platforms. Project Prometheus now encompasses every major body in the outer system. Elena studied the tactical displays showing the complete militarization of human space. In 3 months, humanity had transformed from a peaceful spacefaring civilization into something that could threaten galactic superpowers. "Ma'am," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. They're requesting immediate ceasefire negotiations with the Zelkari hegemony." Response? Admiral Yamamoto is handling diplomatic communications. His message was brief. Humanity will negotiate with any party that has not authorized attacks on children. The Zelkari hegemony does not qualify, Elena smiled grimly. David Yamamoto had lost his own grandson in the Geneva attack, a loss that had transformed the gentle academic into humanity's most implacable military leader. "Director," her tactical officer reported, "we're detecting Zelkari fleet movements throughout their empire. It appears they're mobilizing everything they have." Expected. How long before they can mount another invasion? Conservative estimates suggest 4 months. But ma'am, they're not just mobilizing military assets. Intelligence indicates they're evacuating civilian populations from their core worlds. Elena paused, considering the implications. They're expecting us to target their civilians. It would seem so, ma'am. Then they still don't understand what they're facing. High Counselor Zarthek stood in his war room on Velkaris, surrounded by holographic displays showing the deployment of every available Zelkari warship. The mobilization represented the largest military operation in hegemony history. 40,000 vessels converging on human space from every corner of the empire. High Counselor, Fleet Admiral Kextera reported, "The evacuation of civilian populations from potential target worlds is proceeding ahead of schedule. We estimate 70% completion within 2 months. And our intelligence on human capabilities? Limited, High Counselor. We know they possess kinetic bombardment weapons of unprecedented power and some form of spatial distortion technology. Beyond that, our information is incomplete." Zarthek studied the tactical projections with growing unease. The humans had demonstrated the ability to destroy entire fleets with single volleys, but they had also shown unexpected restraint in their treatment of prisoners. It was a contradiction that his strategic planners couldn't resolve. "High Counselor," his intelligence chief reported, "we've intercepted human communications regarding something called Operation Protective Custody." Explain. The humans appear to be preparing some form of systematic action across hegemony space. The details are encrypted, but the scale suggests simultaneous operations in multiple star systems. Zarthek felt the cold touch of fear. The humans weren't planning to defend their territory against invasion. They were planning to take the war to every Zelkari world simultaneously. How is that possible? They have fewer than 2,000 ships. High Counselor. Fleet Admiral Kextara reported, "The evacuation of civilian populations from potential target worlds is proceeding ahead of schedule. We estimate 70% completion within 2 months. And our intelligence on human capabilities? Limited, High Counselor. We know they possess kinetic bombardment weapons of unprecedented power and some form of spatial distortion technology. Beyond that, our information is incomplete." Zarthek studied the tactical projections with growing unease. The humans had demonstrated the ability to destroy entire fleets with single volleys, but they had also shown unexpected restraint in their treatment of prisoners. It was a contradiction that his strategic planners couldn't resolve. "High Counselor," his intelligence chief, reported, "we've intercepted human communications regarding something called Operation Protective Custody." Explain. The humans appear to be preparing some form of systematic action across hegemony space. The details are encrypted, but the scale suggests simultaneous operations in multiple star systems. Zarthek felt the cold touch of fear. The humans weren't planning to defend their territory against invasion. They were planning to take the war to every Zelkari world simultaneously. How is that possible? They have fewer than 2,000 ships. High Counselor, conventional fleet tactics may not apply to human military doctrine. They've already demonstrated the ability to destroy large formations with weapons we don't understand. As Zarthek contemplated the reports, a new transmission arrived from the human diplomatic mission to the Galactic Council. The message was brief, formal, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. To all members of the Galactic Council, humanity hereby announces the commencement of Operation Protective Custody. All Zelkari military assets involved in the targeting of civilian populations will be disabled or destroyed. All Zelkari government officials who have authorized such operations will be arrested for trial on charges of crimes against sentient children. Any species or government that interferes with these operations will be considered complicit in said crimes. Neutral parties will be warned before any action is taken in their territory. This operation will continue until the threat to galactic children has been permanently eliminated. Operation Protective Custody began at exactly 0800 Universal Standard Time across 300 star systems simultaneously. The coordination required was staggering, but humanity had learned to accomplish the impossible in the months since Geneva. Admiral Yamamoto stood in the primary command center on Luna Base, watching as tactical displays showed the largest military operation in galactic history, unfolding in real time. Around him, thousands of human officers coordinated attacks, humanitarian operations, and diplomatic initiatives across half the known galaxy. Admiral, his communications chief reported, all task forces report ready status. Operation Protective Custody is authorized for execution. Yamamoto thought about the children who had died 6 months ago, their young lives snuffed out to make a political point. Today, humanity would ensure that no other children would suffer the same fate. Execute Operation Protective Custody, he commanded. For Geneva, for all children everywhere. The first wave of the operation wasn't military in the conventional sense. Across Zelkari space, human vessels appeared not as conquerors but as liberators. Each ship carried the same message, broadcast in every known language. Attention, citizens of the Zelkari hegemony. We are representatives of the human coalition for the protection of children. We are not here to conquer your worlds or enslave your populations. We are here to arrest those responsible for war crimes against children and to disable military assets used in such crimes. Civilian populations will not be harmed. Non-combatant vessels will not be attacked. This is not an invasion. This is justice. The reaction across Zelkari space was immediate and varied. On some worlds, civilian populations welcomed the humans as liberators from a government that had oppressed them for centuries. On others, loyal Zelkari defenders prepared to fight to the death against what they saw as alien invaders, but it was on the hegemony capital world of Velkaris that the most dramatic confrontation unfolded. High Counselor Zarthek watched from his palace as human ships materialized in orbit around his world. Not the massive dreadnoughts he had expected, but smaller vessels that radiated an ominous technological sophistication. Each ship was surrounded by a field of distorted space that made them appear to flicker in and out of existence. High Counselor, his military advisor, reported, with barely concealed panic, the human fleet is requesting your surrender for trial on charges of crimes against children. Zarthek's scale shifted to the deep red of Zelkari rage. After 3 centuries of rule, to be threatened by upstart aliens was intolerable. Activate all planetary defense systems. I want every human ship destroyed immediately. Sir, our weapons cannot achieve target lock. Their ships are phasing in and out of normal space-time. Then fire everything at their projected positions. The orbital defense platforms of Velkaris unleashed the concentrated firepower of the hegemony's most advanced weapon systems. Energy beams that could crack continents lanced out toward the human vessels, only to pass harmlessly through empty space as the ships continued their impossible dance between dimensions. Captain Elena Chen, niece of the late Admiral Sarah Chen, commanded the human task force from the bridge of the UN's Justice. Around her ship, 17 other vessels maintained their phase shift patterns while she prepared to deliver humanity's ultimatum. Captain, her tactical officer reported, the Zelkari are firing everything they have at us. No hits registered. Continue evasive patterns. Open a channel to the surface. High Counselor Zarthek's face appeared on the main screen, his alien features twisted with rage and frustration. Human Captain, you dare violate the sovereignty of the hegemony capital? High Counselor Zarthek, Elena replied with calm formality. I am Captain Elena Chen of the Human Coalition for the Protection of Children. You are under arrest for war crimes, specifically the authorization of military attacks targeting civilian children. Surrender immediately, and you will be treated according to galactic conventions for prisoners of war. I am the ruler of 300 star systems. I do not surrender to primitive aliens. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes grew colder. High Counselor, you misunderstand the situation. This is not a negotiation. You will be arrested. The only question is whether you come peacefully or whether we have to disable your entire planetary defense network first. My defenses are impregnable. Your pathetic fleet cannot threaten the capital of the hegemony. Elena turned to her weapons officer. Demonstrate our capabilities. Target the primary orbital platform. Single shot, minimum power. The human weapons had evolved far beyond the kinetic bombardment systems that had destroyed the Zelkari invasion fleets. This shot was a focused quantum disruption beam that simply erased the massive defense platform from existence. One moment it was there, bristling with weapons and shielding. The next moment there was empty space. That platform housed 50,000 personnel, Zarthek whispered, staring at the tactical display, all of whom were transported to safety before the platform was destroyed. Elena replied, High Counselor, humanity does not target non-combatants, but we will neutralize any weapon system that has been used against children. Across Zelkari space, similar scenes played out as human task forces systematically dismantled the military infrastructure of an empire. But this wasn't destruction for its own sake. As each Zelkari military vessel was disabled, its crew was offered a choice: stand trial for war crimes if they had participated in attacks on civilians, or accept retraining and integration into a new galactic order dedicated to protecting children. The response from other galactic powers was swift and decisive. Species after species announced their support for humanity's mission, many revealing that they too had suffered under Zelkari child-targeting tactics, but had lacked the power to resist. Ambassador Tikora of the Sivari Confederation addressed the emergency Galactic Council session. For 2 centuries, our children lived in fear of Zelkari retaliation. Our government made concessions, paid tribute, and accepted humiliation to protect our young. Today, for the first time in our history, our children can sleep safely. Elder Zephron of the Ethereal Collective projected his agreement to the assembled minds. The humans have accomplished in 6 months what we failed to achieve in centuries: the establishment of absolute protection for the innocent. The collective pledges full support for Operation Protective Custody. Even former Zelkari client species joined the coalition. The Thraxian Republic, which had been conquered by the hegemony 50 years earlier, announced, We offer our fleets to the human coalition. Our children were among those targeted by Zelkari terror tactics. Justice delayed is not justice denied. But it was the surrender of High Counselor Zarthek himself that marked the true end of the Zelkari hegemony as a galactic power. Faced with the systematic destruction of his military forces and the defection of his own subordinates, the ancient ruler finally accepted the inevitable. I surrender, he announced from his palace throne room, his forearms spread in the Zelkari gesture of submission. I will submit to human justice. Captain Elena Chen led the arrest team personally, walking through the corridors of power that had once commanded the fear of 300 star systems. When she reached the throne room, she found Zarthek waiting with what appeared to be resignation. High Counselor Zarthek, she said formally, you are under arrest for war crimes against sentient children. You have the right to representation during your trial, the right to present evidence in your defense, and the right to appeal any verdict rendered. The ancient Zelkari looked at her with something approaching curiosity. Captain, why do you extend these courtesies to one you consider a criminal? Elena thought about her Aunt Sarah, who had died defending Earth, and about the children of Geneva whose sacrifice had started this war. Because, High Counselor, that's what separates justice from revenge. We fight to protect children, not to become monsters ourselves. The trials that followed became a watershed moment in galactic history. For the first time, individuals were held personally accountable for war crimes against civilian populations. The Human Coalition established courts throughout former Zelkari space, staffed by judges from dozens of species and operating under a new legal framework designed to protect the innocent. Some Zelkari leaders were found guilty and sentenced to imprisonment. Others, who could prove they had opposed the child-targeting policies, were allowed to participate in the reconstruction of their worlds under human oversight. The Zelkari species itself was offered the same choice as all others: join the coalition for the protection of children, or remain neutral but accept the new galactic order. Dr. Marcus Webb, now serving as the first director of the Galactic Child Protection Authority, stood in his office overlooking the newly renamed city of New Geneva on the former Zelkari capital world. The building that housed his office had once been High Counselor Zarthek's palace. Now it served as headquarters for the largest humanitarian organization in galactic history. "Director," his assistant reported, "we've received confirmation from the Outer Rim. The last Zelkari holdout fleet has surrendered. Operation Protective Custody is officially complete." Webb nodded, thinking about the long journey from that terrible morning 6 months ago to this moment of galactic transformation. "Any word on the memorial?" "Construction is proceeding on schedule. The Geneva Memorial will be completed next month, with gardens representing every species that has joined the coalition." Webb turned to look out at the city below, where Zelkari civilians worked alongside humans and dozens of other species to build something unprecedented. A truly multi-species society dedicated to the protection of children. Former enemies had become allies. Ancient hatred had been replaced by shared purpose. "Sir," his assistant continued, "there's one more item. The Galactic Council has formally adopted the Geneva Protocols as universal law. Any attack on civilian children by any species, anywhere in the galaxy, will be considered a crime against all sentient life." Webb smiled. The first genuine smile he had managed since that terrible day 6 months ago. Humanity had learned something important in their brief but decisive war against the Zelkari hegemony. Sometimes the most powerful weapon in the galaxy wasn't a planet-killing superweapon or a fleet of invincible warships. Sometimes the most powerful weapon was an absolute refusal to accept that the innocent should suffer for the ambitions of the powerful. The children of Geneva were gone, but their sacrifice had created something beautiful. A galaxy where no child would ever again be targeted for the crimes of adults. In the end, that was a victory worth any price humanity had paid to achieve it. As Webb watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded him of hope, he whispered a promise to the memory of 300 innocent souls. "Your sacrifice was not in vain. Every child in the galaxy is safer because of what you endured. We will never forget. We will never stop protecting them." The age of humanity's dominance in galactic affairs had begun not through conquest or subjugation, but through an absolute commitment to the principle that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And at the top of that list, now and forever, were the children who represented the future of every species among the stars.